Let's try this again. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good afternoon. Happy Ishtar, Astarte, aka Easter. This again. Let me mute over here. I think I'll get it together soon. So yes, today we're gonna read all about the goddess Ishtar, Astarte, whom which the day Easter is named after. And let's see, we're gonna pick up actually a place that we left off recently. So, not too long ago, I was reading from The Great Cosmic Mother, lots of excerpts. I think in particular, I was reading about the Epic of Gilgamesh. And but I'm going to use that book as a starting point um, to introduce us to Ishtar, aka Astarte. And then we're going to look at a book called The Hebrew Goddess that talks a lot about Astarte and her other names. And then also a book called Egyptian Mythology. All right, so we're going to start at a familiar place and then we're going to move into a new book. So let me see if I can get this view big enough so that we can see what we need to see. And let's go back to, let me make sure that this is coming through right. Make sure y'all can see everything. Okay, if you hop in, greetings, welcome. Okay, make sure the screen is shown. Okay, yeah. All right, so we're going to start in a familiar place. And so basically, I just used the search tool and I typed in Astarte. And we're going to start. This is The Great Cosmic Mother. I've read from this book a little bit already. So if you have been, if you listen to my readings here and there, you are familiar that I do you are familiar with the fact that I reference this book quite often. So let's start. This is actually, so this is in the introduction. So on the very first page of the book, let's see what and how she introduces Astarte. She says, the Great Mother in her many aspects, maiden, raging warrior, benevolent mother, death-dealing and all-wise crone, unknowable and ultimate word, is now powerfully re-emerging and rising again in human consciousness as we approach the 21st century. Isis, Mawu, Lisa, Demeter, Gaia, Shakti, Dakinis, Shekinah, Astarte, Ishtar, Rhea, Freya, Nerthus, Brigid, Danu, call her what you may, has been with us from the beginning and awaits us now. She is the beauty of the green earth, the life-giving waters, the consuming fire, the radiant moon, and the fiery sun. Okay. So basically, she's just stating that the Great Mother has many names depending on the tradition, the location in the world, the culture, the language. Let's see what else this book has to say about Astarte. Hopefully, we're going to learn something new today. All right, so in this reference, it says the great Semitic moon goddess Astarte was worshipped on Mount Sinai by the Canaanites in the form of a stone pillar long before Moses received the stone tablets of the law there. Mount Sinai, in fact, means mountain of the moon. It is interesting to note that the Hebrew Levite priests were originally serpent priests. Levi, which means great serpent, as in Leviathan. Interesting. Okay, so she goes on, but let's go to the next reference. Next reference. Again, oh, this is down here. Okay. So we talk about the Irish goddess Calich, pronounced Cali, okay. The Irish goddess Cali sits in her lotus position also and does the same. Even Mary of the Catholic Church is called the moon and is turned to by women in childbirth, as was her original Diana Artemis Astarte. All right. All right. So here, see if we can dive in somewhere. Ancient moon priestesses were called virgins. Virgin meant not married, not belonging to a man, a woman who was one in herself. The very word derives from a Latin root meaning strength, force, skill, and was later applied to men. Viral. Viral. Ishtar, Diana, Astarte, Isis were all called virgin, which did not refer to sexual chastity, but sexual independence. Interesting. And all great culture heroes of the past, mythic or historic, were said to be born of virgin mothers. Marduk, Gilgamesh, Buddha, Osiris, Dionysus, Genghis Khan, Jesus. They were all affirmed as the sons of the great mother, of the original one, their worldly power deriving from her. When the Hebrews used the word and in the original Aramaic, it meant maiden or young woman, with no connotations of sexual chastity. But later Christian translators could not conceive of the Virgin Mary as a woman of independent sexuality. Needless to say, they distorted the meaning into sexually pure, chaste, and never touched. Hmm. So I think the symbolisms of this holiday, fertility, the egg, really probably connect back to sexuality. Okay, let's see. Oh, all right. So again here, the biblical King David was also a sacred shepherd. His sensual and ecstatic songs of earthly love, so untypical of the Bible, derive from the ancient love rites of the shepherd king and god and the goddess. Her Canaanite names were Asherah, Astarte, Ashtoreth. Okay. Also up here, okay, it mentions Ishtar. So in ancient Sumeria, sheepfold also meant vulva. In Sumeria and Near Eastern myth and custom, the shepherd king was consecrated in a sacred marriage to the queen of heaven, Inanna Ishtar. Under the eroticized veils of the beautiful young king, I'm sorry, of the beautiful young queen was the primordial great mother, she of the fruitful Neolithic garden. As Thompson points out, the shepherd king Dumuzi ensures the prosperity of his people by being a good lover to the goddess Inanna. So Inanna, Ishtar have the same name that's established here. I mean, they're the same person and they share a name. Um, okay, so let's see what else. So there's more Canaanite references, which we're going to get to what the Hebrew goddess book says about Ishtar in just a moment. I did read this quote. I've read this quote before. The Asherah was the Neolithic goddess Inanna Ishtar, Astarte, Astoreth, Asherah, or the symbol of the goddess. It was conventionalized or stylized tree perceived as she and planted therefore at all altars and holy places. So now they're saying she was as a tree or was a tree. There's a lot of good stuff that I would love to go and read. But we're not reading. This is all focused on Astarte Ishtar today. Okay. Let's see. Oh, it keeps taking me back. Okay, so let's flip over to this book. So this book, let's go. Let me see if I can get to the cover. Get to the cover. Oh. All right, so this book, let me see if I can just go 0. No 0. Let me just scroll all the way up so you can see the cover. All right. So this book is called Egyptian Mythology, a guide to the gods, goddesses, and traditions of ancient Egypt. So let's see what they have to say about who Astarte is. So apparently she was worshipped in Egypt. So let's go and read about Astarte. So she's mentioned here. Well, we're going to compare all of this. Um, we're going to compare this, compare all the texts to see how they line up. Okay. Let me get there. Okay, there we are. All right, there we are. Astarte. So it says Astarte was a Near Eastern war goddess who was introduced into Egypt during the Second Intermediate Period. Okay, so she was introduced into Egypt then. Wonder by who? In Egyptian myth, she became the daughter of Ra and Ptah and a consort of Seth. She is probably the same goddess worshipped by the Philistines as Ashtoreth and the Canaanites as Asherah. She also had much in common with the important Mesopotamian goddess Ishtar. Oh, okay. So this delineates the two. And the Lady of Battle. All right, so I wondered we might have to look up Ishtar. So this is Astarte in particular. In Egyptian art, Astarte was usually shown naked, brandishing weapons and riding on horseback or driving a chariot. This made her a very alien figure. Egyptian goddesses were not usually shown naked, and Egyptian women never rode horses. The lion was one of Astarte's sacred animals, and Astarte was sometimes given a lion's head. This identified her with the Eye of the Sun, the solar lioness who protected her father Ra. Like other goddesses who play this role, Astarte could also appear as a beautiful, seductive woman. In a New Kingdom story, Seth is offered the goddesses Astarte and Anat as compensation for losing the throne to Horus. New Kingdom. Let's highlight that because I think come back to study that. All right. A spell refers to Astarte and a Nats becoming pregnant but not giving birth, possibly because of Seth's association with abortion. Astarte is also linked with Seth in a fragmentary New Kingdom tale known as Astarte and the Sea. This story is very similar to a myth from Ugarit in northern Syria, in which the god Baal overcomes the sea monster Yam. The tale begins with an account of the separation of the earth and sky and the creation of the world. The rule of the creator is challenged by Yam, who is the sea, who embodies the chaotic aspect of the primeval ocean. Yam demands the tribute due to an overlord. The harvest goddess Renun, Ren, Renan, Renanutet delivers boxes of treasure, but it is not enough. We're going to just call her Rainunet. Rainunet. Rainunet sends a bird messenger to Astarte's house to wake the goddess and tell her to take more tribute to Yam. Astarte weeps at the message, but she goes to the shore and sings and dances to attract the sea monster. Yam then wants her for his bride. Astarte is welcomed by the Ennead, who give up some of their most precious possessions to form her dowry. Yam threatens to flood the whole earth if he does not get what he wants. When Yam comes to collect the treasure, he is challenged by Seth. In the Ugarit myth, Baal kills the sea monster, scatters the pieces of its body, and declares himself king. The damaged Egyptian version probably ended with Seth defeating Yam and claiming Astarte as his prize. Oh, wow. So we know that gives a lot of familiar stories, actually, just in that one story of Astarte and the sea. So let's look up Ishtar. Let's see if they have oh, okay. She has her own entry in this book. No, the only time Ishtar is referenced is on page 108, which means, all right, so that means, okay, so Ishtar is the Mesopotamian version. Um, Astarte is the Egyptian association. All right, so let's go on to the Hebrew goddess now, the one that I've really been wanting to get to. Let's see. Hmm. Okay. All right. So this is the Hebrew goddess. I'm going to show you the cover. I need to do this a lot bigger. Let's see. All right. Here we go. Just so you can see the title and who it's written by. So take a look at that, the Hebrew goddess. And let me just make sure that I can get all my screens where they need to be. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Excuse me. Hmm. Let me just check everything. Hello, greetings. You're just coming in, welcome in. And okay, I think I do. Greetings, Elle. Welcome in. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm going to keep going. We're going to look at Hebrew goddess and we're going to search. We're going to search and see if they have both Ishtar and Astarte. So let's start with Ishtar, since it sounds like Ishtar came first because she's the Mesopotamian and Astarte is the Egyptian goddess. And when I search, you can see all these references that come up. So there's a lot. Let's go ahead and type Astarte and see what happens. Okay, and she as well. So we're going to see if they recognize Ishtar and Astarte as being the same goddess, and then go from there. We're going to try to start at the beginning. Let's see. It looks like Astarte is mentioned first on page 5. All right. All right. So looks like there's a whole chapter dedicated to Astarte Anath. And again, those were the two from the previous stories, the two wives that were promised as a gift. So let's go ahead and click there. And okay, so let's dive in here at the beginning. So we'll read just probably this page and then we'll move around a little bit. Okay, so it is a typical feature of ancient Near Eastern and Mediterranean religions that the divinities who people their pantheons form family. I'm sorry, let me just start over. It is a typical feature of ancient Near Eastern and Mediterranean religions that the divinities who people their pantheons form family groups and belong to at least two successive generations. Okay. In chapter 5, we shall have a closer look at the manner in which this old Near Eastern concept reemerged in the Kabbalistic mythology of the 13th and 16th centuries. So I believe there are some typos in here, is what I'm seeing, but we'll just keep going. In the present chapter, we propose to discuss the goddess who was considered along the east coast of the Mediterranean, the daughter of Asherah, and her husband El. Okay, so now we're getting some clarity. We're getting some clarity. So, whereas the great cosmic mother seems to recognize all of those names as being different names for the mother goddess, the great mother. But perhaps the great mother, Asherah, who was said to be the husband of El, they had a daughter named Astarte. Huh. So let's keep reading. And we have an L in the chat. L and L. All right. And who at times and in certain places overshadowed her mother in popularity, and in the hold she exercised on human imagination and emotion. Whoa. Her proper name was Anath. However, she was equally well known far beyond the boundaries of Syria and Palestine by the name Astarte. And then they give us the Hebrew version of that and the plural version of that, which seems originally to have been her most favored epithet. Now, I remember this word, which I believe it came up in my last reading, but I believe it just means another name for, basically. Okay, a by name. commonly or occurring in place of the name of a real or fictitious person. Yeah. Okay. It is a characteristic of the unsatisfactory state of our knowledge of the history of ancient Canaanite religion that we cannot as yet be sure whether Anath and Astarte were originally one and the same goddess or two separate female deities who, in the course of the gradual development, became identified. Okay, so that references the question um, that I just posed. In the following, we shall have to leave this problem unsolved and discuss separately first Astarte and then Anath, while presenting also the data which connect the two goddesses. Okay, so I'm excited now, more excited than I was because I had heard through the grapevine, but just like listening to other teachers talk about there being a daughter that the god El and his consort had together. But this is the first time that I actually heard a name being put and seeing that being read in a book. So I'm really intrigued by this. Um, all right, so let's keep going. The Canaanite Astarte. Most of the chief gods of ancient Syria, to judge from the Ugaritic sources, had two names. Occasionally, one was a proper name and the other an epithet. As we have seen above, the Lady Asherah of the sea was also referred to as Elath, that is, goddess. Her husband, properly named Father Shunem, was in most cases styled El, i.e., God, or Bulel. Okay, now we're getting some specifics. Asherah's son, Had, is almost always called Baal or Master. The divine moat is also called El's darling Gazir. Another god is alternately called Prince Yam Sea. Oh wow. And Judge Nahar River. In like fashion, Ashira's daughter seems to be called either Anath or Astarte. Okay, so now we're getting a whole bunch of characters in the storyline, and this is making me want to pull out my book. But I know I'm on video, I can't do that, but this is how I do. When I read and study, I will skip around from book to book when I remember references and terms and names of deities or things being mentioned in other books to help me connect more dots in my own thinking. But in my previous video where I entitled The Syncretism of Gods, lots of these characters were mentioned in that. Two names for a deity are a prosodic requirement for classical Semitic poetry. Wow. Two names for a deity, a favorite device of which is the reduplication of significant statements without a repetition of the same words. In order to be able to express the same idea in two parallel sentences using two sets of synonymous words, the Semitic poet had to have at his disposal two names for his gods who figure so prominently in his mythological poems. Okay, let's see if we got any questions. Make sure everything's still coming through good. All right. The following examples, all taken from the Ugaritic tablets, illustrate the point. Then came the messengers of Yam, the envoys of Judge Nahar, or she penetrates El's field and enters the pavilion of King Father Shunem. Or say unto divine Moat, and declare unto El's darling Gazir. He cries to Asherah and her children, to Elath and the band of her kindred. In the same way, the names Anath and Astarte appear in parallel positions, making it probable that the two names refer to one and the same goddess. That makes sense. Whose fairness is like Anath's fairness, whose beauty like Astoreth's beauty. Or in another passage where the first part of the crucial name, Anath, has to be conjecturally completed. His right hand, Anath, seizes, Astoreth seizes his left hand. Such Semitic refinements of style were lost on the Egyptians. And thus, we read in a 12th century BCE hieratic papyrus that Neith the Great, the god's mother, demands that the Ennead, the nine great gods, should thus address the All Lord, the bull residing in Heliopolis, double Seth in his property. Give him Anath and Astarte, your two daughters. Other Egyptian documents, some as early as the 13th century, also show that Anath and Astarte were accepted in Egyptian religion as two separate goddesses of war. So now this connects back to what we just read in the book Egyptian Mythology. Welcome in. We're reading the Hebrew goddess, all references to Astarte and Ishtar. Both are referenced in this text, and we're just trying to make some sense out of who each character was and how they were related to each other. And we just started this chapter. By the 18th dynasty, Astarte had become a goddess of healing in Egypt. Referred to as a star of Syria, Ramses III calls Anath and Astarte his shield. Both Anath and Astarte, as well as a third goddess derived from the Canaanite Syrian pantheon, Kadish, bore the Egyptian title Lady of Heaven. An Egyptian stele erected in Byzantine Palestine in the 12th century BCE shows an Egyptian worshiping the goddess Anath, Lady of Heaven, mistress of all the gods. Of the three, Astarte seems to have been the most popular in Egypt. She had her own priests and prophets, as Asherah had in Israel. Also in Moab, the name of Astarte appears with the omission of the feminine ending as Ashtar and is coupled with Chemosh on the Moabite stone of ca. When is that canon? 830 BCE. Astarte seems to have been the consort of Chemosh, Moab's national god. Hmm. A Canaanite city called Ashtaroth, Ashtaret, or Ashtartu in the Bashan is mentioned in several Egyptian documents from the 18th century BCE on, as well as the Amarna letters, which date from 14th century BCE. At a much later period, Astarte became the chief goddess of Sidon, replacing Asherah. All right, so the daughter begins to replace the mother. The daughter had married someone, became a partner to someone. When this transition occurred is unknown, but by the 4th century BCE, it was completed, as can be concluded from the fact that at the time the kings of Sidon were also the priests of Astarte, and their wives had the title priestess of Astarte. However, the changeover could not have taken place much earlier, because a century later, Sidonian king Ashmun Azar reports that he and his mother built a temple for Astarte in Sidon by the sea and Shehem Adiram, two sections of Biblios. In other words, in his days, the cult of Astarte was still spreading in Phoenicia. The same inscription of Eshmunazar, which contains the above details, also tells us the full Sidonian name of Astarte. It was Astarte Shem Baal, i.e., Astarte of the name of Baal. Astarte and Eshmun, the holy prince, the lord of Sidon, were termed the gods of Sidon. The name Ashtoreth of the name of Baal occurred to the north of Sidon over 1,000 years earlier. This is how the goddess, in all probability, Anath, is called in two passages on Ugaritic tablets. Hmm. Whew. Interesting, interesting, interesting. So let's pause here and we're going to pick up, make sure I don't lose my spot. Welcome in. We are exploring Astarte, Ishtar, as they are the reasons today has the name that it has, Easter. Eventually, we will make some connections and pull everything together. Okay. All right, so let's pick up here. This is more or less the gist of what we know about Astarte from Canaanite and Phoenician sources. Oh, and we shall see later the Canaanite mythical material about Anath is much more abundant. Wow, okay. So, yeah, that's the gist of what all we know about Astarte from Canaanite and Phoenician sources. So, this next part is going to talk about Astarte in the Bible. Astarte in the Bible. Okay. So, in passing now to an examination of the biblical references to Astarte, let us begin with those which show the clearest correspondence with the extra biblical sources. The city of Ashtartu in the Bashan is referred to several times in the Bible as a city of Levites. Remember Levites, what Levites means. Once it is called Be Eshtera, once Ashtera, but usually Ashtoreth in the plural form, which is frequently employed in biblical place names. Ashtoreth was originally the capital city of Og, the legendary giant king of Bashan, and of his people, the Repham, who were smitten by Chedorlaomer. The last mentioned detail is contained in an old semi-historical, semi-mythical account, which is only referenced to retain the full old name of the city, Ashtoreth Coronam, Astarte of the Two Horns. The concept behind this designation is graphically illustrated by several Astarte figurines found at various archaeological sites in Palestine and actually showing the goddess with two horns. The original meaning of the name Astarte, Astoreth, was womb, or that which issues from the womb. Such a meaning is more appropriate as an appellative. Okay, let's look that up. Okay, appellative means relating to or denoting the giving of a name. A common noun such as doctor, mother, or sir, used as a vocative. Okay, appletive. All right. Such a meaning is most appropriate as an appletive for a goddess of fertility. She is called she of the womb, i.e., the inducer, as well as symbol of fertility, just as her brother consort Baal was the inducer and symbol of male fertility. Thus, the primary meaning of the names of the divine couple, Baal and Astarte, was begetter and conceiver, man and woman, husband and wife. All right. This being the case, the name Astoreth or Astarte must have originally been but an epithet of the goddess whose proper name was Anath, just as Baal, master, was the epithet of the god whose proper name was Had. Now, as to the biblical references to the goddess Astarte, the first mention of her worship by the Hebrews comes from the early period of the Judges, soon after the penetration into Canaan, and they forsook Yahweh and served the Baal and the Astoreth. A little later, more explicitly, and the children of Israel again did that which was evil in the sight of Yahweh, and served the Baalim and the Astoreth and the gods of Aram and the gods of Sidon and the gods of Moab and the gods of the children of Ammon and the gods of the Philistines, and they forsook Yahweh and served him not. The first purge of these Baals and Astartes took place at the bidding of Samuel and was immediately followed by a decisive intervention by Yahweh in favor of his people in their battle against the Philistines. As to the Philistines themselves, their Astarte must have been a goddess of war as well as that of love and fertility. And this is why when the Philistines defeated Saul, they deposited his armor in the temple of Ashtoreth, undoubtedly as a token of gratitude. Oh, wow. In chapter 1, we argue that the goddess whose worship Solomon introduced into Jerusalem in honor of his Sidonian wife was none other than Asherah, the Elaith of Sidon. As a result of confusion between Asherah and Astarte, which, as we have seen, began with the 14th century BCE Amarna letters, and whose sporadic traces can be found down to our present day. The Hebrew historian of the Solomonic era repeatedly refers to the goddess of whose worship Solomon was guilty of as Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians. In a reference to the same goddess at a later time, she is no longer accorded the title goddess, but instead is called Ashtoreth, the detestation of the Sidonians. Wow. Oh my goodness. This is how she is spoken of by the historian who records that King Josiah of Judah defiled the high places which Solomon had built for Ashtoreth. All right, and then it goes into the archaeological evidence. The goddess Astarte is mentioned only 9 times in the Bible, as against the 40 times that Asherah is referred to. The Bible thus fails to convey any idea as to the prevalence of the worship of Astarte among the Hebrews. A somewhat better idea can be gained from the archaeological evidence that has come to light in evacuations conducted in the last few decades in many parts of Palestine. By the early 1940s, a total of no less than 300 terracotta figurines and plaques representing a nude female figure had been unearthed. Wow. Is this why they want to destroy Palestine? These nudes fall into several distinct types, such as those with arms extended to the sides and holding stalks or serpents. Oh, remember the Levites? Try to fix my light here. All right, just okay. Or with hands holding the breasts, or with one hand placed over one breast and the other over the genital area region, or with hands crossed before the breast. Some are figures of pregnant women, other pillar figurines, etc. The persistence and ubiquity, ubiquity. All right, ubiquity of these figurines is remarkable. The persistence, wow. They have been found in every major excavation in Palestine, and their prevalence extends from Middle Bronze, 2000 to 1500 BCE, to Early Iron, 2, 900 to 600 BCE. That is to the end of the period of the divided Israelite monarchy and even later. The so-called Kadesh type is clearly associated by its symbolism and with a goddess. I'm sorry, associated by its symbolism with a goddess, and other types are assumed by most scholars to have been representation of the goddesses Asherah, Astarte, or Anath, although no direct or definite identification could be made so far. According to a very cautious view, it is still an open question whether the figurines represented the goddess herself or a goddess, a prostitute of the cult of the goddess, or were talismans used in sympathetic magic to stimulate the reproductive processes of nature. Hmm. So the question that I have is, was this a suppression of the goddess, of the feminine aspect of divinity from the very beginning by one of these sons, one of these other gods or deities? Mentioned that there was God the Father El, and then he's not been mentioned any further. It's all about Baal and these other deities. In the following remarks, we shall concentrate on one single site which has been studied more thoroughly and systematically than probably any other in the country. This is Tel Beit Mirsum, to the southwest of Hebron, today on the Israeli-Jordanian border. The Tel mound of ruins was excavated in the course of several years by William Albright and identified as the biblical town Devere. The systematic archaeological study of this Tel has shown that the site was first occupied by Canaanites in the early Bronze Age, period 4, which is circa 21st century BCE, and it flourished in the Middle Late Bronze Ages. Okay, and that it was destroyed towards the end of the 13th century, evidently by the Hebrews who at the time conquered the area. In the beginning, the early Iron Age was 12th century BCE. The town was resettled by the Hebrews. All right, and it flourished until the end of the 6th century BCE, when it was destroyed in the course of the general devastation of Judea at the time of the first exile, 586 BCE. All in all, there were in Devere some 10 or 11 periods of occupation. Wow. The town itself was larger than the average Israelite towns of the First Temple period, measuring about 7.5 acres inside the walls. Oh, wow. So she goes on about this one particular town. And then she goes into the Ugaritic myth of Anath. And then Anath in the Bible. All right. And so now what we're going to do, I'm going to put a bookmark. Oh, I already have a bookmark. Well, yeah, I do already have a bookmark there. All right. And now we're going to search Ishtar to see any correlations and to make more sense out of each character. All right, so looks like, oh wow, how great is that? Ishtar's first mention is in this next portion, so we're going to read this portion right here. Okay. All right. As mentioned above, the Canaanite mythical material about Anath is abundant. This is due to the discovery and decipherment of the alphabetical let's see how to pronounce this. Cuneiform. Cuneiform tablets of Ugarit, written in a language closely resembling Hebrew and dating from the 14th century BCE in Ugaritic mythology. Anath is the by far most important female figure, the goddess of love and war, virginal and yet wanton. Let's look this word up. Wanton. 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 Oh, deliberate. Oh, okay. Of a cruel or violent action, deliberate and unprovoked, sexually unrestrained. Oh, wow. Okay. So she was, okay. All right. So virginal yet sexually unrestrained, amorous, which means love, and yet given to uncontrollable outbursts of rage and appalling acts of cruelty. She is the daughter of El, the god of heaven, and of his wife, the Lady Asherah of the sea. Right. I don't think it's got my lighting. That messes up my lighting, doesn't it? Okay. Where was I? All right. She has so many features in common with the Sumerian Inanna and the Akkadian Ishtar that one must regard her as heir and kin of those great Mesopotamian goddesses. All right, so I'm definitely highlighting this sentence because actually in the one before. So we can get a good note to the relation of these characters. So Inanna is Sumerian. Ishtar is Akkadian. Asherah is Canaan. Canaan from Canaanites. And Anath is her daughter. All right, hold on, you guys. All right. It's a little better. I'm trying to fix my lighting a little bit. Whew, how's everybody doing? Been going for 54 minutes so far. But we're going to come to a good closing place pretty soon. All right, so let's keep going. However, instead of being concerned primarily with finding ever new divine human and animal bedfellow, as Ishtar was reputed to have been. Wow. So they just said, did y'all catch that? Wow. Okay. They just called Ishtar out as, okay. Anath spent most of her energies on the battlefield. She too, to be sure, was a typical goddess of love, both chaste and promiscuous. Her character is aptly epitomized in a 13th century BC Egyptian text in which she and Astarte are called the goddesses who conceive but do not bear, meaning that they are perennially fruitful without ever losing their virginity. In the Ugartic myths, her constant epithet is the maiden Anath or the virgin Anath. And as late an author as Philo Biblius, who flourished in the early 2nd century CE, still refers to the virginity of Anath, whom he identifies with Athena, the famous virgin goddess of the Greeks. Like Ishtar, Anath was called Lady of Heaven, mistress of all the gods, and again, like Ishtar, she loved gods, men, and animals. Hmm. Oh my goodness. Let's look up Akkadian, because, oh, Akkad. It was used in Mesopotamian from Syrian, relating to Akkad in ancient Babylonia. Okay. Or its people or their language. An inhabitant of Akkad, which is related to Babylonian. Okay. And we've heard of Sumerian relating to Sumer. Its ancient language or the early non-Semitic element, it contributed to Babylonian civilization. Huh. Ooh, excuse me. All right. Her foremost lover was her brother Baal. When she approached, Baal dismissed his other wives, and she, in preparation for the union with him, bathed in sky dew and rubbed herself with ambergris from a sperm whale. The actual intercourse between Anath and Baal is described with a graphic explicitness which is unique even among the unrestrained accounts of lovemaking usual in ancient Near Eastern texts. In a place called Dubra, Dub, Dubra, Baal lay 77 times with Anath, who assumed the shape of a heifer for the occasion. Okay. All right. And it appears that the wild bull born to Baal was the issue of this union. Hmm. A mortal lover of Anath was Akhat, whom, after what must have been an intimate titi-a-titi, Anath addressed as my darling great big he-man. On the motherly side, Anath was said to have been one of the two wet nurses of the gods, to have given suck to a son of King Karit, and one of her Apletions was progenitress of the peoples. In Egypt, Anath came to be regarded as the wife of the god Seth, and an Egyptian magical text from the 13th century BCE describes in surprisingly sadistic terms how Seth deflowers Anath on the seashore. Okay, wow. Yet all these adventures in the fields of love pale to insignificance next to Anath's great exploits in wife in where, oh goodness, I must be getting tired. Exploits in war and strife. In fact, no ancient Near Eastern goddess was more bloodthirsty than she. She was easily provoked to violence, and once she began to fight, would go berserk, smiting and killing right and left. One sees her plunge into fighting with real pleasure. She smites the peoples of both east and west, so that their heads fly like sheaves and their hands like locusts. Not satisfied with this, she bounds their severed heads to her back and the cut off hands to her girdle, and plunges knee deep in the blood of troops and hip deep in the gore of heroes. Now she is in her element. Oh goodness, her liver swells with laughter, her heart fills up with joy. Wow. It was this bloodthirsty and warlike Anath whose worship penetrated Egypt sometime prior to the 13th century BCE. She was for the Egyptians as well, Anath, Lady of Heaven, mistress of all the gods. a war goddess who was associated with horses and chariots and who, equipped the shield and spear, protected the pharaoh. Indeed, because of her warlike nature, Anath in Egypt was called the goddess, the victorious, a woman acting as a man, clad as a male, and girt as a female. Oh, wow. So that was Anath. Let's see. Let's pick up with Ishtar to see, since she's older, see if we can find anything else. Okay. So this is more. So there's okay. In Athens, Artemis was honored with round cakes like Selenia, which represented the moon. A Babylonian hymn on Ishtar mentions the Kamanu sacrificial cakes offered her. Oh. If Hebrew Kawan cake is in fact derived from Babylonian Assyrians Kwamanu, then it is likely that the Queen of Heaven worshipped in Jerusalem corresponded to the Babylonian Assyrian Ishtar, who is referred to as Sharat Shem, Queen of Heaven, and similar titles. All right. So they're establishing their connection. All right, let's go to here. All right. So this is on ancient tetrads, or a triad. Ishtar is mentioned here. A Hittite myth of unquestionably Canaanite origin is the one in which the tetrad of Aklunazira that is the Canaanite El, creator of the earth, his wife, Ash Asherah, their son Baal Hadad, the storm god, and their daughter Ishtar. Astarte or Nath figures prominently. So this is a Hittite myth. An ancient Near Eastern bronze figure of unknown provenance shows a divine tetrad. So tetrad, I'm sorry, I misquoted earlier. It's actually 4. It says tetrad, although not as common as triads, are found in several religious cultures of antiquity. All right, so let's just look up the word tetrad to get clear on that. Yeah, a group or set of 4. So it's talking about the father El, his wife Asherah, their daughter Astarte, and their son Baal. Astarte had other names like Anath or Ishtar, right? And Baal also had other names. Um, all right. Mhm. All right. And so actually, we might just read this whole thing through. So let's make sure we know. So actually, we're not too far from where we were, right? Because we were over here. Um, let's go back to the table of contents so we just know where we are and where this book is going, because I see a lot of good things that are relevant to us making sense out of what's being said. So we're actually down here Hopefully y'all can see that table of contents, which I think y'all can. I don't know. But in the second, so the first chapter, let's just go. Let me see if I can go back and just show y'all from there. Okay, yeah, let me just show you from here. All right, so let's just look at the layout of this book. So again, this book is called The Hebrew Goddess and is written by Raphael Patai, which we're probably going to look up that author because I want to know who that is. Um, and when we look at the table of contents, the introduction looks like it's some general things about the goddess. And then it gets into specifically who the goddess Asherah was, the Canaanite goddess Asherah. Then it gets into the details of Astarte, Anath, which we just mostly read. We mostly read most of this section, part 2. Astarte was Asherah's daughter. Okay, then there's a section on the cherub, which would be interesting. The Shekinah, the Kabbalistic tetrad, which is a set of 4. All right. So the father and the mother, and then the son and the daughter. So this is important. The tetragrammaton. Now that's come up a lot. I hear it mentioned a lot. In the Bible, God is referred to by several names such as El, Elohim, Shaddai, Yahweh, or a combination of these. In the Talmudic I'm sorry, period. The most frequently used name of God was the Holy One, blessed be He. In the Zohar and Kabbalistic literature in general, God is still called the Holy One, blessed be He. But in addition, several other mystical divine names appear, which refer to God in relation to various stages in the history of the universe, or designate certain aspects of His being. The ancient biblical tetragrammaton, Yahweh, is regarded in the Kabbalah as an abbreviated symbol of 4 divine elements which form part of the deity. The 4 elements are Hokmah, wisdom, Bina, understanding, Teferet, beauty, Malkut, kingship. Moreover, wisdom is identified with the Father, understanding with the mother, beauty with the son, and kingship with the daughter. These 4 divine concepts form the Kabbalistic tetrad. So let's highlight that. All right, so that's interesting that the name Yahweh is regarded in the Kabbalah as 4 divine elements, which form part of the deity. I wonder what forms the other part of the deity. One passage in the Zohar, for instance, states the letter Y in the name Yahweh is called Father and stands for wisdom. The first H is the supernal mother called understanding, and the W and the H are the 2 children, a son and a daughter, who were crowned by their mother. Okay, so that's a good piece to bring into the conversation. All right, so that's the tetragrammaton. And let's go back and wait, let me bookmark that. And then let's go back to the table of contents so we can just again look at the overall. Containment. All right, yeah. So, all right, so there we are. That's the Kabbalistic tetrad. Then the next section is the matronate, goddess of the Kabbalah, and details there. The myth of God and the Shekinah. The, I'm not even gonna try it. Yehudim, Yehudim unifications. The Shekinah as Majid and vision. Lilith. Oh. The Sabbath. The goddess in the Dura synagogue. So all of that's a lot in this book. Maybe I'll actually read all of it. But let me see. Let's pick up with Ishtar. So she's mentioned in the ancient tetrads. So there are other tetrads that show up throughout history. So we read this part about the biblical tetragrammaton. And then the author goes into an Egyptian. All right, so it says tetrads. Tetrads, although not as common as triads, are found in several religious cultures of antiquity. The earliest known group of four related gods is that of ancient Egyptian religion. The father god Shu, we read in early Egyptian mythological texts, was the heir that carried the sky. His female counterpart was Tefnut, goddess of moisture. Their union produced a son, Jeb, or earth, and a daughter, Nut, or sky. Jeb and Nut were united in tight marital embrace until Father Shu separated them by raising the sky up from the bosom of the earth. Only somewhat younger is the tetrad myth of the Sumerians, the old non-Semitic inhabitants of Mesopotamia. Now, I find it interesting that she wanted to point out, okay, non-Semitic inhabitants. Wow. So Sumerians were non-Semitic. The precise family relationships of the gods of the Sumerian pantheon is obscure, and in most cases, little is known about which god was whose son, husband, father, or brother, and which goddess was whose daughter, wife, mother, or sister. Nevertheless, it has become clear, primarily thanks to the indefatigable studies of Samuel N. Kramer, that there was a close first degree relationship between a group of four gods who were in control of the heaven, earth, sea, and air, and who among them created all the other cosmic entities. The four were the god of heaven, An, the great mother goddess, Ninhursag, the god of water, Enki, and the god of air, Enlil. Okay, we know this four. We've heard of this four. Enki and Enlil, the two brothers, their father Anu. One of them killed their father. Remember that story? I literally talk about that in the Syncretism of the Gods video. And we see this common story repeating itself here again with these characters. That they were a clearly defined tetrad is evident not only from their position of primary creator gods, but also from their continued importance after the emergence of the other gods. It is they who usually head the god list and are often listed as performing significant acts together as a group. Moreover, at divine meetings and banquets, they were given the seats of honor. Mm. As an, okay, let me start. An Anu, the heaven god, was once the supreme ruler of the Sumerian pantheon. But as early as the 3rd millennium BCE, his place was taken by Enlil, the heir god, who is also titled Father of the Gods and King of all lands. He was also the god of wisdom and the ruler of the abyss. An early indication of the oft recurring connection between wisdom and water. Ninhursag was called Ninma, Nintu, and Aruru. Her original name seems to have been Ki, meaning Mother Earth. Oh. She was probably taken to be the wife of Anu, heaven, and the two, An and Ki, Anki, An and Ki, may have been conceived as the parents of all the gods. Okay, so let's click on these references because I really like this story. I'm curious where it came from. Now, I hope it's going to take me back. What does that mean? Let's, so all of these. Oh, okay. So all of this comes from Noah Kramer's book, The Sumerians, Their History, Their Character. Okay. So this guy here, the Sumerians and their ancient. Okay. All right, back to the book, y'all. Y'all, I'm sorry if my skipping around bugs y'all. I'm neurodivergent, so it's just how my brain works. In her capacity as the great mother and the earth goddess, Ninhursag was also the lady who gave birth, the mother of all living things, and especially the mother of the earthly kings. The early Sumerian kings liked to describe themselves as constantly nourished with milk by Ninhursag. I want to see how to pronounce her name because I just feel like I'm butchering it. Ninhursage. Ninhursage. Sage. Okay, Enki, king of the watery abyss, calls himself in a paean of self-glorification, the firstborn of An. Oh, okay. Calls himself in. Let's see what is this word? Paean? A song of praise or triumph. Okay. Which would make Ninhursag his mother. However, in another passage of the same long poem, Ninhursag is called Enlil's sister, and she calls Enki my brother. This apparently reflects another version of the early Sumerian tetrad, according to which An, heaven, had 3 children, Ninhursag, Enki, and Enlil. The contradiction in the position of Ninhursag, who appears as both mother and sister of Enki and Enlil, can possibly be resolved by referring to the Zoharthic explanation of the tetragrammaton discussed above. The father wisdom there too, we shall recall, brought forth the mother. That is, the mother was originally the father's daughter, but then father and mother had a union, and the mother gave birth to the son and the daughter. Thus, the mother was at once and at the same time also the sister of her son and daughter. It can be conjectured that a lost Sumerian myth may likewise have told how father and An, okay, brought forth Ki, who is Ninhursag, by spontaneous generation or by masturbation, as Atum has said to have engendered Shu and Tefnut in Egyptian mythology? If so, then Ninhursag, like the mother in Kabbalism, was both the mother and the sister of her two children. Okay, I get what she's saying, but we hear so many different versions of this. And I want to say in the Syncretism of the Gods video, I came across the same sort of question about who was whose father, and who was whose mate, because there was just some overlapping going on that was hard to make sense of. So I really appreciate the fact that she's acknowledging that here. The Tetrad of the Hittites, whose ancient empire centered on the Anatolian plateau and who spoke several unrelated languages, can be mentioned only in passing. The Hittites absorbed so much foreign mythological material that the isolation of the original Hittite myths would be a major scholarly task which lies far beyond the present author's competence. However, even a cursory perusal of the readily accessible Hittite myths shows that groups of four gods appear repeatedly. One text fragment enumerates the four gods: Kashku, the moon god; Taru, the storm god; Hapantali, and Katak Zawori. Another appeal to the mighty gods: Naras, Napsaras, Minkins, and Amunkis. A Hittite myth of unquestionable Canaanite origin is the one in which the tetrad of Ulkunasir, that is the Canaanite El, and his wife Ashtarah, and their son Bel, the storm god, and their daughter Ishtar, figures prominently. Okay. And this is back to the part that I read earlier. So now this really comes together and we can kind of see where Ishtar fits in. Excuse me, with the different periods of time. Hmm. So just by looking at the ancient stories, right? Because what do you think? I mean, do you look at what comes first, or you look at the iterations and the remnants that came later? Hmm. Because the oldest, well, they say the earliest known group, they say ancient Egyptian religion, and then they say only somewhat younger. So these stories popped up around the same time, according to this author. But let's see what her reference is for that. She references mythology in ancient Egypt. Okay, mythologies in the ancient world. By that same author. Huh, makes me want to go back to the other book I was looking at, the Egyptian mythology book, and just search this time for let's search for shoe. Huh, so this is interesting. All right, so if we go back here, I put shoe in, and shoe comes up under atom. Okay, because well, I'm trying to get back to the beginning. That's what I'm trying to. All right, so Atum, a creator deity who began and ended the world. Atum Atum was the senior deity of the group of 9 gods known as the Ennead of Heliopolis. When Atum became aware of his loneliness, he masturbated and impregnated himself with his own semen to produce the divine siblings, Shu and Tefnut. So I just want to stop right here and say that in order for a deity, it couldn't have been male or female right here, right? We're talking about an androgen that would be able to do that. And they're not giving this deity a gender. So this deity created Shu and Tefnut. Atum and Ra were often, so then it just starts talking about Ra, were often regarded as the primordial and solar aspects of the creator. The joint deity Ra-Atum or Atum-Ra wore the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt to indicate his position as the king of the gods. Within the daily solar cycle, Atum was a setting sun who becomes old every evening. At the beginning and end of each of the great cycles of existence, Atum took form in the primeval waters as a snake or an eel. Atum and the Apophis serpent have been interpreted by some Egyptologists as the positive and negative forces within chaos. The name Atum comes from a word meaning completeness or totality. The potential for all life was contained within Atum. When the primeval mound came into existence, Atum had a place to begin creation. He conceived and gave birth. Okay, now okay, so I see at this point they're starting to refer to this as a he. And I want to say that was the first moment that they used he pronouns. He conceived and gave birth to the first 2 engendered deities. So I would argue they should use she. What he has a womb, what he has a uterus to give birth, or a vagina to give birth to anything. So would it be more of a she or he? I know that's probably, you know, I probably shouldn't entertain that argument, right? Okay, let me just keep going. As the father and mother of the gods, okay, Atum was the ultimate divine and royal ancestor. In the act of creation, Atum was shown in human form. Oh God. Okay. Sorry, y'all. Holding or sucking his erect penis. From the New York onward, the hand of Atum was personified as a goddess, usually Hathor, Nebuchadnezzar, or Uasis. The image of the hand and the penis coming together to create life could be replaced by the concept of a divine union between the male and female principles inherent in the creator. Yeah, okay. Huh. A hand of Atum is also mentioned in magical texts as a powerful talisman to drive away evil. In Egyptian symbolism, beings and images often had dual sexual and apotropaic meanings. So, I bet this, let's see if we can get a definition for this word. All right, it's not going to show y'all, but it shows me. Oh, okay, so that just means intended to show, to ward off evil. Another part of Atum with an independent existence was his eye. The coalescence essence of Atum with Ra is expressed in the myth in which Atum sends out his eye to bring light to the primeval darkness. This Eye was also a goddess who was both the daughter and the consort of the creator. The Eye goddess was mainly referred to as the Eye of Ra, but occasionally as the Eye of Atum. These terms could be used to express a contrast between the headstrong and dangerous aspects of this goddess and her more amiable, protective aspect. Hmm. Sometimes, however, the Eye of Ra was the sun and the Eye of Atum was the moon. Huh. So this is interesting. But again, so here they name this god Atum. You think Atum and Anu are the same people or the same deity? But I want to do something. Um, I should have started by doing this, but I want to look up the authors of both of these so that we can get a visual um, and background information, and then we're going to wrap this up. I hope that you learned something. I hope that you were able to make some connections in your own research and studies. I encourage you to start with the episode under the Fifth Iteration podcast playlist called um, The Syncretism of Gods. There's like two parts, and I also share references. And if you listen to all of these together, it will make a lot of sense. Today was a focus on Ishtar, Astarte, to just look up some background information about who those characters were. And in doing that, we also made some connections back to a previous video, which I wasn't intending on happening, but it did, which is great. So this book is called Egyptian Mythology, A Guide to the God and Goddesses and Traditions of Ancient Egypt by Geraldine Pinch. So what we're going to do is look up this author. Um, Geraldine Pinch. All right, so this is to read a little bit about her. No, that's Geraldine Harris. But is that her? Okay, yeah, that's her. Same person. All right, so that was her. She's also known as Geraldine Harris. Let's see. She's English and she's an Egyptologist. She is a member of the Faculty of Asian and Middle Eastern Studies at the University of Oxford. Okay. And that's all they have. Let's see, what has she written? Is this the only book? Uh-oh, sorry. Sorry about that, y'all. Um, okay, so she wrote other books. All right. So that's what she has to say about this. Now, the next, let's look up the Hebrew goddess. And this is written by Raphael Patai, born Irvin. I won't even try it. Oh, but he's Hungarian. Hmm. So he was born, hold on one second. Read a little bit about him there. Let me just fix something really quickly. See if I can fix something. Okay, so yeah, let me snap back into play. All right, so this guy, let's see. His mother was born in wherever this place is. Where is that? Is in Romania to German-speaking Jewish parents. Huh. So does that make him Jewish? So he was, okay, he's Hungarian Jewish. Oh, he's Jewish. Both parents spoke Hungarian and German fluently. His father was a prominent literary figure, author of numerous Zionist and other writings, including a biography of this person. Oh, so a biography of the father of modern political Zionism. So that was his father. Oh, okay. So he studied in Budapest. So he was born in 1910 and he died in 96 in Arizona. Hmm. See what else? Oh, wow. He founded the Palestine Institute of Folklore and Ethnology. Hmm. So his work focused primarily on he's trying to develop the culture of ancient Hebrews and Israelites, on Jewish history and culture, and on the anthropology of the Middle East generally. Wow. Oh my goodness. He married and moved to what was then Palestine in the early 20th century. They had two daughters, Jennifer and Daphne. Oh, wow. He wrote a lot of books. A lot. The myth of the Jewish race, the children of Noah. All right, so that's the authors that, well, actually, you know what? We've never looked up the authors of Great Cosmic Mother, and I reference this book all the time. So let's look up Monica Sajou. Let's look her up. So this is Monica Sajou. Let's see what her background is. Okay, so she was born in 1938 in Sweden. She died 2005 in England. Her notable work is God Giving Birth and the Great Cosmic War. So we'll look up Barbara Moore because they both wrote this. I guess it's by both of them. Where is it? Is it in here? Yeah. Um, yeah, so they're both on the cover down at the bottom. Both of their names are there. So she's Swedish-born writer and radical anarcho eco-feminist who was an early exponent of the goddess movement. Her books and paintings were foundational to the development of feminist art. So she's kind of the artist all throughout the book. Okay, let's look at Barbara Moore. So Barbara Moore is an American poet, editor, and feminist in the goddess movement. From 1936 to 2015, she became most widely known for The Great Cosmic Mother, a cross-disciplinary study that cites numerous archaeological and anthropological, historical, and mythological texts and artifacts as evidence of women's roles as creators and first practitioners of humanity's earliest religious and cultural belief systems. She was published, okay, by Athena Press, Woman Spirit, second Porcupine Press. All right, that's all right. Let's see. This doesn't tell us much about her life, but she was American. That's all we really get. Hmm. Much don't. All right, so that was that. Now we're going to wrap up just by taking it back to the Hebrew goddess, and we're going to skim through a few more references of Ishtar just to see where the author takes Ishtar if any more information is revealed. So we left off where we read from the chapter on ancient tetrads. And so from there, it looks like Ishtar is referenced again in the chapter on the goddess of love and war. All right. So Matronet, the goddess of the Kabbalah. And so what he did was start to look at the four elements of the tetragrammaton. And in this part, he's looking at the fourth person of the Kabbalistic tetrad, the daughter, who, in addition to the old Talmudic name of Shekinah, is referred to in Jewish mystical literature by a profusion of names, epithets, and appletives, but most frequently by the Latin loan word matronita, that is, the matronate or the matron. Of the four persons of the Kabbalistic tetrad, it is she who plays the greatest role as a central figure in both divine happenings and relationships, and the occurrences through which human fate, and in particular the fate of Israel, is propelled forward. She is the central link between the above and the below. She is the person through whom man can most easily grasp the ineffable mystery of the deity, and who most fully identifies herself with the interests, joys, and woes of Israel. She is unquestionably the most poignant and at the same time most Jewish expression of the idea of a goddess. Okay, so then he goes on, and we're going to jump down here. 3 or 4 examples will have to suffice to introduce us to the goddess who played a central role in the religious ritual as well as popular consciousness of all ancient Near Eastern people. Hmm. Her name varied from culture to culture. Inanna in Sumer, Ishtar in Akkad, Anath in Canaan. Yet her character remained the same for centuries, even millennia. The life domains in which she primarily manifested herself were love and war, and her personality exhibited everywhere the same 4 basic traits of chastity and promiscuity, motherliness, and bloodthirstiness. The oldest of them was Inanna, the great Sumerian goddess of love and war, the tutelary deity of Uruk, the biblical Erik, whose prominence in the Sumerian pantheon was well established by the 3rd millennium BCE. That she was regarded a virgin is evident from the 2 epithets which accompany her name. In myths and other texts, she is most frequently called the maid Inanna and the pure Inanna. Yet, throughout Sumerian history, she was a goddess primarily responsible for sexual love, procreation, and fertility, who freely gave herself to Tammuz, the earliest mythological ruler of Sumer, and therefore became the wife of all Sumerian kings. Nor was she immune to the advances of ordinary mortals. An old Sumerian story tells of a gardener who one night managed to take advantage of Inanna's utter weariness and had intercourse with her. Wow. So that whole story about like the gardener, the pool guy, the lawn guy, like the wife sleeping with that. Look how old that story is. Oh my God. Goes all the way back to Sumer. Upon awakening in the morning, Inanna was enraged over the indignity and the vengeance she wrought seems to us to have surpassed all reason, but her behavior was in keeping with her character, for she was a goddess of boundless rage and ruthless destruction, the lady of battle and conflict who had great fury in her wrathful heart. It was she who armed King Hammurabi, Hammurabi with mighty weapons and was his gracious protecting genius. More than 1,000 years later, in the days of Nabonidus, Nabonidus, she was still worshipped at Uruk in a gold-clad cello, driving a chariot to which were harnessed 7 lions. All right, so that was Inanna. Now, here's the thing about Inanna. I want you to think about if you've heard that before in songs. Inanna. I can think of one for sure, Inanna, and then maybe even two. So I'm thinking of a Rihanna song where that's repeated, and maybe Little Kim, where she's saying Inanna. So that's something to consider. The direct heir of Inanna in Mesopotamia was Ishtar, the great goddess of love and war in the Akkadian pantheon. The identity of the two is attested by the fact that in some Akkadian texts, the two names are used interchangeably. In the Babylonian Ishtar, however, a certain shift occurred in the balance between the virginal and promiscuous poles of her character. Her virginal aspect was underplayed, while her promiscuity was emphasized to the extent of making her a divine harlot. In many texts, Ishtar is spoken of as the cow of the moon god Sin, and in this capacity she ruled over the plants, watered them, and made them grow. An incantation for childbirth tells of this cow of Sin that was impregnated by a restless young bull and had great difficulty in bearing her young until two genii of heaven, Genie, Genie of heaven helped her. In her human form, her love easily turned to hate. She first loved, then destroyed, a long line of divine human and animal paramours, including a lion, a horse, a bird, a gardener, and several shepherds. The hero Gilgamesh, Tammuz, etc. Hmm. Well, let's look up this word to make sure we're not. Oh, wow. So, I hope you guys are picking up what this is saying because I had to read again to make sure I was comprehending that right. But yeah, okay. She was also the wife of human kings, such as Sargon of Agadi. Her influence extended over all mankind and the entire animal kingdom. When she entered the netherworld, neither man nor beast co-populated. When she emerged, all of them were again seized by sexual desire. Wow. When she entered the netherworld, nothing, no fertility, no intercourse was happening. But when she emerged again, they were all seized by sexual desire. Wow. But she was also the mother of the country who said of herself, "It is I myself who gave birth to my people," and the mother of several gods, among whom fire god was the firstborn. One of her titles was sweet-voiced mistress of the gods. Yet she was also the most awesome of the goddesses, Ishtar of the battlefield, clad in divine fire, carrying the Melamut headwear, who would rain fire on the enemies. It was she who gave victory to her lovers, the Babylonian kings, entrusting her mighty armed forces to them. Among all the arts of war, she was specially interested in charioteer charioteering. In the early stages of her career, she tried to win the love of Gilgamesh by promising him a chariot of lapis and gold. And more than a millennium later, in the Ptolemaic period, she was still known as Mistress of Horses, Lady of the Chariot. When in not when not engaged in love or war, she was sitting inspiringly on her lion throne. Wow. So this was Inanna. She was something else, wasn't she? Whew. Let's look up the reference from for this little piece. So this came from the book Semitic by Stephen Langdon. Huh. So yeah, I mean, this really makes it's really making me think about, back then, the suppression of the goddesses. I mean, look how wild and just off the chain, you know, sh this particular goddess, she embodied so much all in one deity. So this is really interesting. So we're going to start wrapping up. Let's go back to our search and just see where this book continues to go with Ishtar. Then I can decide if I want to read any more of this book. So we were just at page 80. So goddess of war, goddess of love and war. Then there's another section where, okay, so Mary. So so in this whole chapter on the matronate, okay, this is an entire chapter on the goddess of the Kabbalah. We just read portions of the goddess of love and war, but from there, he goes into other views of this matronate. And again, I'm going to highlight this part that talks about what the matronate or the matron, who that was or what that represents. It represents the fourth person in the Ka, um, Kabbalistic tetrad, the four, the mother. So the four were the mother and the father, the daughter and the son. So the daughter is referred to as the matron, and this entire chapter goes into the different views from different schools of thought or different cultures. So the political view, the virginal, the lover of men and gods. There's some biblical references here. Um, so this might be interesting to read at some point. The motherly matronate, the warlike matronate, Mary and the matronate. So now we're talking about the Virgin Mary. So that would be interesting to read. And then the meaning of the matronate. So I'll just read the first sentence here. We discussed a few of the traits which make up the four aspects of the matronate: her chastity, her promiscuity, her motherliness, and her warlikeness, or bloodthirstiness, which are the most important components of her personality. So that's kind of how the goddesses were. They encapsulated duality, whereas I think the way that for the most part, our viewpoint is very dualistic. Like, we don't see the dual things being combined in one. We see them as separate. But these deities housed dualities within themselves. So hence goddess of love and war, motherliness, which is creation, and then warlikeness or bloodthirstiness, which is like death and destruction. So those dual components being housed in one entity. So that's where that chapter ends. And so let's see, after this chapter, she's picked back up in two other places. Looks like he talks about Lilith. Okay, and so this chapter, the entire chapter is Lilith. So in that chapter, it talks about who Lilith is, and then Ishtar is mentioned here. Let's see on what page and where at exactly. On page over here. Okay. So this was a bold inscription written in Aramaic and around a picture of Lilith, similar in execution to the one referred to earlier, though differing in detail. All right, so there's Ishtar mentioned there. And then here, Ishtar is mentioned. Pope, after quoting the foregoing two paragraphs in his commentary to the Song of Songs, adds, so something the Pope says related to the Song of Songs. Okay, so yeah. So this is where they were questioning whether or not. So we know Solomon, when he married who he married, he started worshiping a goddess. And they're questioning exactly who that goddess was. Was it Inanna? Was it Ishtar? Was it Anat? Those sorts of things. Or was, in this Pope in particular is questioning, or was it in the name of Yahweh and his Sabbath bride? So that's where Inanna and both Ishtar are mentioned. And then, okay, so this is this chapter. And I believe that that's it. This chapter is called the Kabbalistic Sabbath. All right. All right. And let's just read the first sentence here. The Sabbath, to which we now turn our attention to, is an exceptional figure among the female divinities of Judaism. All the numerous images discussed so far were originally either foreign goddesses and demons or had their beginnings in Jewish divine attributes, which were conceptualized and personified. As against them, the Sabbath and a unique example of a day of the week are more precisely the name and idea of such a day. And having been developed into a female numen and endowed with the character of virgin, bride, queen, and goddess. Okay, so this is interesting. So no longer is the Sabbath the noun as describing the day of the week, but he's saying that the Sabbath had other representations and meanings. Wow. So that's interesting because Sabbath and there's a term in Kemetic culture called Sabbat, which means teacher. It's spelled very similar with one B. So that's interesting to see those correlations and then this new representation of the Sabbath. So this actually, I think, is an interesting chapter too. So maybe I will actually read this entire book from, you know, beginning to end, but sometimes I will just get books as references and like just use the search and move around. It just comforts my brain to do things that way. So again, thank you for all that tuned in. On today's share live broadcast on um, Ishtar Astarte. I think that I definitely learned more. I learned so much more, and this opened up more than I ever intended to really discuss today. I thought we would just learn a little bit about some attributes of Ishtar and Astarte. But what we have learned today is the difference between Ishtar and Astarte. Um, Ishtar is Akkadian, right? Astarte is more Egyptian or Canaanite. And Astarte is Asherah's daughter. And Asherah was a consort to El, which we have just talked about before. But in addition to that, we were made aware of the four, the tetrad, the mother, the father, the son, and the daughter, and these different tetrads that show up in these different cultures, with the oldest being that of the ancient Egyptian tetrad. And then just a little younger, per this reference, was the Sumerian tetrad. And a lot of the same stories playing out with just different names. And we got to see that this goddess Inanna, this goddess Ishtar, Astarte, the daughter, how she embodied dualistic aspects like creation and destruction, love and war, um, chastity and promiscuity, all in, um, all within herself. Um, so, and then when we think about that, this is a deity or a god, a goddess that was created by another deity. Um, Perhaps these things were possible for deities because it's hard for us to imagine, a human being embodying so much of dualistic aspects, even though we do in small amounts. But some of the things that we read about her and what she did. So. Again, leave your comments below. Drop an Easter egg. Drop an Easter egg if you made it to the end. Um, if you notice some tangent um, tangent points or some connections with other things that you're reading or other stories, please feel free to drop those in the comments. Any questions you might have, um, and where you would like to go next, because I almost feel like connecting this back to the syncretism of gods and picking up there or maybe even just exploring goddesses in general, deities in general, and their identities. I think the tetrad was an interesting thing that was discussed. Usually we just hear about the triad, you know, the Holy Trinity. But why is it the Holy Trinity and not the Holy Tetrad? Why was a daughter left off? I don't know, just questions or more so reflections. Um, reflections. So yes, don't forget to like the video, comment, and if you haven't already, subscribe. And I will talk to you. See you next time.